Hello everybody. As a mobile game, you're going to have organic installs and paid installs. Between the two, we're going to be focusing on paid installs today, and we're going to be answering the big question, which is how do you measure the performance of your paid installs? They are, after all, a cost to your business. What you need to do is replicate the analysis behind me for your own business, which looks at installs segmented by ad network and then looks at revenue per install cumulatively over time by days since install. What this allows you to do is compare ad networks to each other so that you can select and move your marketing spend to ad networks that generate more revenue per install. In the demo business behind me, you can see that the yellow trend line that's above the rest of the ad networks represents ad network 12, and it's doing fantastic. It has an average $7.16 of revenue per install or per user. It's doing so well that it's 40% higher than next best ad network, which is ad network 3 at $5.10. So with this information as a marketer, you can strategically move your user acquisition budget or your marketing budget to ad network 12 so that more of your installs are coming from an ad network that generates more revenue per user or per install. So let's move now to MySQL so I can show you exactly how to do this on a technical level so that you can successfully replicate this for your own business. Okay, so here we are in MySQL, and we're going to start with an installs table. So let me show you a few records from this installs table. Okay, so the very first thing is we're focusing just on paid installs. So they're going to be coming in on a ad network or ad partner. So let's filter for just those paid installs and remove any organic installs that installed via word of mouth. So we will do where attribution network is not null. And let's run a few records here. Okay, and as you can see, they're all paid. Great. Now, the next thing we need to do is select the fields that we want. So we want the customer ID. We certainly want the attribution name. So that's the ad network name. And then we want the install date. And then here's what we want to do. We're going to write a window function that's going to help us select the very first install date or install instance per customer. So we will do a row number over partition by customer ID, and then we're going to order by the install date time ascendingly. So we will call this install index. And let me zoom out so you can see this entire query. And let's run a few records. Okay, so just to demonstrate how this window function works, if you look at our second and third rows in our output data set here, you'll notice that we have the same customer that is installed twice, right? So we want to take the earlier of the two install dates. So as you can see here, for this one customer, it assigned an index of 1 and 2. 1 for the very first install instance, which happened in January of 2023, and then the value of 2, which was assigned to the second install instance, which happened in August of 2023. So what we're going to do in a subsequent step, actually the next step, is just to set this install index to 1 so that this record is always taken and this record here with a value of 2 gets dropped, because we just want to look at each customer's very first install instance with your company. Okay, so let's go ahead and put this in a subselect. We can call it install index, and let's just bring up these fields from the previous subselect. And let's make sure we add that prefix here, the prefix noting where the data is coming from, or noting that it's coming from this subselect here. So we will do that and then copy it down twice. And then most importantly, to take the very first install instance, we want to do this. So within the where clause, say where this install index equals 1. So again, this prefix here is referencing this entire subselect, and then this install index here references this field within this subselect. Okay. Let's run a few records now. Okay, great. So in the output, we are looking at the very first install per customer along with their attribution or ad network, ad partner. Okay, very good. So the very next thing we want to do is we only want to look at installs that occurred in November of 2023. And the reason why is with our analysis, we want to have a leading 365 days at least when we trend out and compare these ad networks to each other. So right now we have each customer and their very first install date. Now we only want to keep the customers who had their very first install date in November of 2023. So let's do that together now by adding more into our where clause. So the very first thing we're going to do is for each of these install dates, let's reset it to the first day of the month. So we will do that by doing a date format, and we will do this. So what this means is, as an example, if a customer installs September 15th, 2024, it's going to take that September 15th, 2024 value and reset it to September 1st, 2024. Okay. So now we're going to do something interesting. We are going to replace this value with the current date. So the current date is December 28th, 2024. So it's taking the current date and it's resetting it to the first of the month. So this value is December 1st, 2024. Now, as mentioned earlier, we only want installs from November 2023. So how do we get from December 1st, 2024 to November 2023? Well, we're going to do a date add. So we'll do date add. And then we will do interval negative 13 months. So what we did is we took the current date, which is December 28, 2024. We reset it to the first of the month, December 1st, 2024. And then we subtracted 13 months from December 1st, 2024 to get to November 2023. And then we're only taking installs that basically equal November 1st, 2023. So let me show you that that worked. Let's run a few records. And if you look at our third column here, you'll notice that all the values are installs from November 2023. Okay, great. So now the next thing to do is to bring across the leading data or leading dates. If you recall, in our analysis on the x-axis, we had days since install. Those are all leading dates or leading data. So we need to bring all dates that are greater than or equal to the install date per customer. So I'll show you how to do this now and what's going to be an expansive join. We can call this entire subselect installs. And this entire thing will be our first table. Now let me show you the second table that's going to be part of the join. So it's going to be a table of dates. So it is called dim date. And as you can see in the second column, we just have a column of dates. So let's go ahead and write our join statement. We're going to do a left join over to the dim date table. And we can just call this table dates. We'll do on dates.date. So bringing across dates that are greater than or equal to the install date. So what this is doing is per customer, per install date, which happened in November of 2023, it's bringing across all dates that are equal to or greater than the install date, allowing us to take one record and expanding it so that we bring across all leading dates. So let's run this now, and let me pick one customer example so you can see exactly how this works. So we will say where the installs dot customer ID is equal to this value right here. We will copy that field, and then we're going to do an order by. So I want you to see this in chronological order. Again, this is just an example, and we will be deleting this once everything is understood. Okay, great. So we have a customer ending in 536 that came in as a paid install on Ad Network 17. They installed in November of 2023, actually on November 23rd. And we're checking to see were we able to bring across dates that are greater than or equal to that install date, November 23rd, 2023. And the answer is yes, because Having ordered this data, we can see that we were able to bring across the install date again, November 23rd, 2023, and then all dates greater than that. So November 24th, the 25th, the 26th, the 27th. So that's fantastic. We've succeeded in that endeavor. Now let's go ahead and delete this player example. We don't need this in our overall query. And let's just wrap this in another subselect. We can call this leading dates. And all we need to do is re-reference these fields from the previous subselect. We just need to be careful to change out this prefix because we are referencing this subselect, not the install subselect. Now, the next step in this project is for each customer and each install date, for every one of those ascending leading dates, we want to get a summation or a running total or a cumulative amount of revenue per leading date. So if we go back to our example, we see this customer ID that's ending in 536 that installed November 23rd, 2023. And what we want to do is for each one of these leading dates, we want to calculate the cumulative or running total of revenue. So for example, if we get to this record, November 29, 2023, we want to know, hey, how much total revenue has this player generated between their install date, November 23rd, 2023, and November 29th, 2023. And we want to do this for each one of these leading date values. That'll allow us to calculate cumulative revenue per install. And in the mobile games industry, this is also known as average revenue per install, ARPI, or ARPU, average revenue per user. Now, what we need to do is we need to figure out where are we going to get this revenue data from. So we do have a revenue table in our database. It's called fact player revenue. And here it is. It is just a table with revenue transactions per customer. So we're going to go ahead and join over to this revenue table. So we're going to do a left join. Over to this table, we're going to call it revenue. And it's going to be on leading dates. Dot customer ID equals revenue dot customer ID, and we want the revenue dot purchase date to be less than or equal to this leading date value, meaning I want all the revenue that happened on and before this date. So we will take this and we'll put this here. And that's how we get a running total or a cumulative revenue amount per leading date. So all we need to do is just bring in and aggregate and sum that revenue from the second table or the revenue table. So we will go revenue and we want to bring across the purchase amount. But if no purchase amount exists, let's make sure that we convert that null to a 0 so it doesn't mess up our aggregation. And then we will do a sum here. And we're just going to call this cumulative revenue. And then we're just going to group this. Now let's run a few records, make sure everything works. Okay, so looking at our sample data, you see a customer, their install date, and then a summation of revenue. And the way you read this is you look at this date, for example, and say, this customer generated $49.99 of revenue between their install date, November 16, 2023, and December 12, 2024. And that'll get recalculated for every value within this leading date column. So it'll do the same thing for the next value, December 13th, 2024. It'll sum revenue between the install date and December 13th. Okay, great. So now we're ready to aggregate our data and move it over to Excel. So let's go ahead and take this. We will put it in a final subselect that we can call ag. And what we want to do is figure out what are we grouping our data by. So we're grouping it by two things. We're grouping it by ad network and day since install. So let's calculate day since install as date diff between the ag.leading date and the install date. And then because we are segmenting everything by ad network in our final analysis, let's also group by ad network. So we will do ag attribution name. We can rename this to ad network or whatever you please. And then what we're going to do is we'll just do a count of records. That's going to be installs. And then all we need to do is just a summation of cumulative revenue. And we're going to divide the two, this value by this value, to get cumulative revenue per install by days since install and segmented by ad network. Okay, great. We're ready to run our final query. Fantastic. Here's our data. We have days since install, the ad network, the count of installs, and then the running total or cumulative amount of revenue generated by each of these ad networks and their installs by days since install. So the only recommendation I would have is maybe use the round function in MySQL so that you can take these additional decimal places and just round them up to an easier value. So you can do something like this. This is saying, hey, just round to the nearest whole number. Okay, let's go ahead and move this over to Excel. All right, so here we are in Excel. What we're going to do is, again, just divide the cumulative revenue value by the count of installs, and then we'll get cumulative revenue per install. So let's give this column a header. And let's add a currency icon here. There we go. Now let's move this over to a pivot table. Okay, and then we're going to put day since install here in the rows. And then we're going to put the attribution name here across the top where the columns are. And then let's add cumulative revenue per install. Great. Now let's add a label filter. So less than or equal to 365 days. We just want to look at the leading 12 months or leading year. And then what we want to do is let's remove these grand totals, these rows and columns. And then let's also make sure we add back in this currency icon here. Okay. And now we're ready to chart this. All right. Okay, so this is pretty amazing. What we did is we picked one install cohort, November 2023, and we're looking at the performance for the leading 365 days or leading 12 months, and we're comparing the ad networks against each other. And what we're looking at is the revenue per user cumulatively. And what you can see is ad network 12 up here is outperforming everybody. It's actually doing 40% better than the next best ad network, which is ad network 3. So as a marketer, you can use this information and say, I'm going to shift my marketing spend or my marketing budget over to ad network 12 because I get basically 40% more revenue per user than the next best ad network. So this has a lot of implications, which means that you can pay back your marketing spend a lot faster, and you're also creating a digital audience that's more densely populated with monetizers or users that spend more money per person. So anyway, I hope this tutorial has helped. Thank you very much for joining. Have a great rest of your day.